You mentioned briefly efforts in the UK to bring caste discrimination within the remit of the Equality Act, something that we've been campaigning for to ensure that Dalits have some sort of legal protection against this form of prejudice, which is very real. Research has shown that caste discrimination is happening in the UK. I just wonder if you could say a word about we've recently found out the government don't intend to provide that level of protection that we think is necessary. They're not going to amend the Equality Act to bring caste as a protected characteristic. What role do you think Hindu nationalists have had in that decision in the UK?
I think they've had a crucial role because they have a lot of meetings with government, they're close to government. I mean, as I said, there's cross-party support, so the Labour Party is also vying for this support, not as it happens, Corbyn has clean hands on this one. He's been actually quite protective of Dalit rights. He's chaired the Dalit Solidarity campaign, I think, for years. But other members of the Labour Party are embedded with them, and definitely they are very close to the Tories. They have many meetings. The Hindu Forum has had many meetings over the years when the only time they've come across as somewhat extremist in Britain, not the only time, but one of the times is around these issues, where I went, for instance, to an all faiths network. It was a new network designed to bring moderates together, because there's so many extremists basically in interfaith groups. I mean, there's certainly many Muslim extremists in interfaith groups. So there was a wonderful speech from a very progressive Muslim imam, for instance. But then a Hindu spokesman got up to speak, and he started talking. At first, I really didn't know what he was talking about, because he was talking about cultural genocide. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I couldn't understand it. But he was talking about the caste discrimination issue. And he was talking about the bishops who had supported protections on caste. So he was basically against this sort of what he saw as a Christian lobby that was going after the Hindus. And the issue of cultural genocide was about the right to choice in marriage. I think it was about, if you have this protection for Dalits, then they can come and marry our daughters. And what will happen then? I mean, this will be destroyed. So this whole issue of population and Hindus dying out because they get converted to other religions or they drift off in ways they're not, contained. So that's one set of things which they talked about. But the closeness to government is absolutely there. And I think the Tories have been really pusillanimous about this, because they talk tough on extremism, but this is an extremism that they absolutely see as allies. And it is so cynical and self-defeating.
It's funny, we actually lodged a Freedom of Information request with the government to find out what meetings they had with Hindu organisations in the build-up to the decision not to legislate against caste. There were no meetings, apparently. So I'm not sure where they are meeting, but
there's an academic called Edward Anderson who looked at the whole issue of M.F. Hussain, who was hounded out of India. He's an Indian Muslim artist by his name, and there were so many cases against him. I mean, there isn't an official blasphemy law in India, but there are old offence laws which are very similar. And he was like, there were so many cases against him that he actually had to leave India and go and live in the Middle East, which is not exactly a bastion of freedom either, but he was safer there. And when his paintings were shown here at Asia House, they were vandalized. And that's one of the times when this Hindu Forum became prominent, because it was advocating against Hussain for painting naked goddesses, which are absolutely central to Hindu traditions. And he said that they had many meetings with government at that time.
Yeah.
So
Sure they have. Right. Gentleman there with the blue blazer.
So, I'm Dr. Pankaj, I'm a surgeon. I just had a few questions. I will need some guidance from you, because I'm a very spiritual person. I work as a surgeon. I qualified from India, then I came here because I thought it's a free and fair country. I think I will need some guidance, because I believe in Hindutva. Say if Sita has been addressed as sexy Sita several times in the last 10 years when Congress was in government.
Sita, for the rest of the audience, is taken as goddess Sita, Ma Sita. I don't like her to be addressed as sexy Sita. The book Ramayana, what you were referring, there was a version of Ramayana called Ramanuja Ramayana, introduced in 2011-12 in JNU University. And the book teaches the Hindus that the Ram used to leave Lakshman and Sita alone because they were having extramarital affair. That hurt me, and obviously I'm a spiritual person. I don't think that is right. Lawyers went to the court, and finally Monica Arora was the lawyer who led the group of lawyers, and finally this university course was withdrawn from JNU because that was absolutely blasphemous to the Hindus. If you write something like this for any other religion, that Sita and Lakshman were having an extramarital affair, I can tell you, you will be beheaded if you write anything about any other religion like that. That is my second question. My third question is, the slide behind you says Hansa Mehta was supporting Uniform Civil Code. The BJP, the RSS, the VHP, whom we have criticized so much, they are supporting Uniform Civil Code, gentlemen. If Hansa Mehta was alive today, she would have been supporting BJP because they are fighting for Uniform Civil Code for last, 60 years, 70 years, and they are opposing it. And when we talk about minorities, please talk, I'm a Pandit. 5 million Kashmiri Pandits have been butchered in Kashmir. No one talks about them. I graduated from AIMS Delhi, which is a very prestigious institution. I have dealt with my own colleagues, junior doctors, who came showing me the letter. They had letters dropped through their post box saying either convert or leave this city. And if you are leaving the city, please leave your women folk behind. And there are 5 million Kashmiri Pandits who are my brothers. They have been butchered in Kashmir, no one talks about it. There were 5,006 butchered in Delhi alone in 1984. When you talk about minorities, Sikhs are in minority, Christians are in minority in India, Buddhists are in minority, Jains are in minority. Why don't we talk about them? No one wants to talk about. If this room is full of tolerant people, give me 5 minutes. I haven't met any speech or any slide. I haven't read anything. I'm a heart surgeon. I do my job. I was on emergency call yesterday. But I can stand there and tell you, please believe in Hindutva. Hindutva is a way of life. It's not a fight going between, I'm not a Congress person or a BJP person or I'm an RSS person. I'm a spiritual person. I believe, ma'am, you will know, Janmashtami was a few days back, yeah? And I celebrated Janmashtami. Suppose on the day of Janmashtami, you come or anybody else comes and tells me that, look, if you believe in Krishna, start saying, Bhishma Pitama Murdabad, Dronacharya Murdabad. Anybody who has read Mahabharata will know that Krishna was the person who instigated Arjun to kill Bhishma Pitama and kill Dronacharya.
Okay, excuse me, I think your point's out of order.
Okay,
please sit down.
Can we have an answer?
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Let's get respond.
Well, I regret that there are a lot of things I had to drop that I wanted to say. And on the issue of the Kashmiri Pandits, it is a huge stain on the conscience of India and the conscience of the human rights communities, both in India and abroad. Because you're absolutely right. The things that happened to Kashmiri Pandits were exactly what was happening, similar to the things that I described in other atrocities that have happened. And yet,
can you tell us what a Kashmir
oh, sorry. The Hindu Kashmir is a majority Muslim state.
Yes.
I mean, there are Buddhists and there are other people living there, but there were Hindus were called Pandits over there. That was their caste background, and they were driven out in the 90s during the course of a Pakistan-backed insurgency. I mean, there has been a lot of violence in Kashmir. The army is violent against, some of the citizens of Kashmir. I don't want to defend everything that the army does in Kashmir, but on the other hand, what is very difficult for people in the civil liberties movement to acknowledge is that there has been what is clearly a foreign-backed insurgency. I mean, the evidence is absolutely clear. And as the gentleman said, Kashmiris were driven out. I mean, I have acquaintances and relatives and friends who were driven out of Kashmir during the 1990s largely, and who became internal refugees, displaced people internally. This was an issue that was taken up as a BJP issue, and it became a central, one of their central issues, and was therefore not taken up, which was wrong, by other organizations. So for instance, when Amnesty or Human Rights Watch or whatever, they've done reports on state violations in Kashmir, of which there are, but they haven't really examined the cross-border violations. They haven't examined what happened to people who were murdered, coerced, driven out. So I absolutely agree that was a horror, and it is one. On the Uniform Civil Code, I tried to indicate that this is something that is in the Constitution as an idea and has never been implemented, and that the BJP did take it up, and that made it difficult actually for feminists to take it up because they didn't know whether, because you see what Hansa Mehta wanted was a whole lot of other things that go with the uniform, not just something uniform, but something that gives women a lot of rights. And even now, where, in fact, even within the BJP, Menaka Gandhi wants to develop she's a minister in the government, she wants to develop what's called a prenuptial agreement, to give, women rights in marriage. And a lot of the orthodox people are saying, no, we don't want that because, it undermines Kanyadan, it undermines the sacramental nature of the Hindu ceremony. So there's an argument inside that. So I did try and indicate some of that in the talk. What you're saying about hurt feelings, I think speaks to absolutely centrally the issue of whether people's hurt feelings ought to stop discussions or challenges to religion. Now, the BJP now claims the figure of Ambedkar as somebody that they embrace, that he was a great Dalit leader. They say they respect him, and they've actually, put garlands on his statues and so on. But Ambedkar burnt the Manusmriti. Yeah, he burnt the book of Hindu law, which is a sacred text of Hindu law. And he talked about the annihilation of caste, and he was anti-Hindu in a very profound way. I mean, he led his people into, he said, I don't want to die a Hindu and untouchable. So he led them into converting to Buddhism. That was one of his solutions. So I think, I understand that your feelings may be hurt. The Ramanujan case, I mean, to my shame, I haven't read Ramanujan myself, so I don't know exactly what, there are a lot of allegations made about things. So having not read, I don't know if the allegations you're making are true. I think it wasn't JNU, it was Delhi University. JNU has become a focus because it's a known left-wing university, and the students there have been attacked. There have been fake videos distributed about them. In fact, precisely on the Kashmir issue, there was a young man only a few days ago who was shot at in the center of Delhi. And this young man is called Umar Khalid. He is by background a Kashmiri Muslim, but he is an atheist and a leftist and a student leader. And so he's like a walking trigger warning. And actually, right in the heart of a security area, somebody tried to kill him. That's pretty serious. I mean, the MPs there, there's, heavy security around there, and these killers got away. Somebody's been arrested for that now. Then they put up a video saying that they thought it would be an Independence Day gift to the nation. So the students of JNU have been demonized because they were what was shown later to be faked videos on TV showing that they were shouting Azadi, which is freedom, and it's a slogan that Kashmiri separatists shout. So they were made out to be Kashmiri separatists, but actually they were shouting anti-patriarchal feminist slogans, freedom from caste, freedom from violence, freedom from this, that, and the other. I mean, feminist friends of mine invented those slogans. That's what they were shouting. So there's a lot of lies, a lot of misinformation, and I accept that you may be very deeply hurt by some of the things that are said, but Ramanujan was a standard book on a standard text. And the fact that there was this attack on it, as there was on Wendy Doniger, as there have been now on a woman called Audrey Trushka, who's written on Aurangzeb. Now, I may not agree with everything Audrey Trushka says.
He lived his full life. He was never beheaded. He was never chased. He lived his full life. He was never chased or haunted. He lived his full life.
But he was not controversial.
Okay, no more questions. We've got to let someone else speak now. Gentleman in the check shirt.
In theory, is the Indian Constitution a secular constitution? Does it have anything in it about individual human rights? And are the courts in India capable of supporting those?
Absolutely. I mean, it has very strong protections for individual human rights. And just recently, we've had the courts standing up for human rights. There's been a major judgment. It's like it's a leading judgment in the world on the decriminalization of homosexuality.
Okay, that's at a very high level. Is that true also at lower level?
They're much more corruptible at lower level. They're much more problematic. But sometimes they do. I mean, there are lawyers who will fight in those courts, and they will continue to fight. And these are the ones who are actually being attacked now. It's people who are the defenders of the lawyers in the local courts who are fighting for the rights of the most marginalized people, for labor groups, for tribal groups, for Dalits, and so on. So it's a broken system, but it's stumbling on. And what there is a consciousness among people which makes them stand up for their rights and makes them feel that the Constitution is theirs, and that they own it, and that they will speak in its name. And that's what I was trying to convey, that Constitution came out of the anti-colonial struggle, because the colonial struggle was not about just getting rid of the invader and the foreigner. It was about saying we are responsible for our own oppression. Once the British have gone, we have to solve this oppression and solve the problems of this society. And of course, they haven't been solved. But that consciousness is there, and it's what fuels that resistance.
Thank you. Next question. Richard.
Thank you for your fascinating lecture. Can you just say a bit more about the activities of the HSS in the UK? How big are they? What does their activism consist of? Is it money raising, or is it other things? What are they actually doing?
Well, it's a very disciplined organization. So I interviewed a woman who had grown up within one of those organizations. She said that she changed and left, in the late 60s. I mean, she's but she said that they did a lot of charity work. So I mean, well, they have regular classes and sessions. I mean, maybe later the gentleman can tell us if he goes to them. But they do a lot of charity work. They have their own flag, so they salute the flag. They do certain exercises. They maybe do some yoga. They get taught about Indian history, but as I tried to indicate briefly, in a slightly warped way, and things that actually don't stand up to scrutiny. But they gain a pride of being Hindus living in Britain, and unlike some of the extremist Muslim groups and so on, I mean, they don't dress differently or have any visible markers of difference that way, and so that they're seen as perfectly integrated. In fact, indeed, many of them are doctors, lawyers, and other things. So they're both working class people, and it's a cross-class movement. They're people who are professionals. And so on. But they have been very instrumental in, for instance, organizing a huge jamboree for Modi when he came Prime Minister, when he came to Wembley, which actually Cameron had a walk-on part. I mean, he appeared as the sitting Prime Minister of this country, as the sidekick of a foreign leader, to try and get the Indian vote. So, and Labour MPs were saying they'd give raise in their wages towards this thing. So they do raise money for their own causes, but also for charitable causes outside. But those charitable causes are also about restructuring and reordering what's happening, the villages in India. So, for instance, encouraging conversion. So you get people called Nava Hindus, new Hindus, who may have been Muslims, who've taken on a Hindu name and building a Ram temple in the middle of the village and things like that.
So
but a lot of these projects just collapse after a while.
Given that they're a registered charity in the UK, do you think they provide any public benefit?
I think they're quite dangerous as a registered charity. I think, I'm not in favor of banning groups and things like that, but I don't see why they're a charity. And I don't see why half the charities that are charities are charities indeed.
Agreed. Gentleman in the blue jumper?
From the organizer, one question, please.
I think you've asked one. Gentleman in the blue jumper.
Got a question about Charity Commission, a few questions. So, what kind of an organisation is it? Who is it accountable to? Where does it get its funding from? So when I say what kind of organisation is it like a government quango, or is it under the remit of the Home Office? And what's the role of the Charity Commission solely at all with regard to the politicians, etc.?
Do you want to answer that, or shall I? Or
You go first.
Well, it's a government. It's set up by the government to. It's the charity regulator for all registered charities in the UK. It's funded by the government. It's underfunded, given the vast number of charities there are. There are big questions about just how effective it can be as a regulator with the funding it has and the vast number of charities that we have. We are actually at the moment preparing a report on charities in the UK and the role of the Charity Commission, so that will be coming out shortly, so look out for that. Any other questions? The lady there in the third row?
Question that puzzles me. I think throughout history and in current days as well, we've seen governments of the day relying on scriptures to justify their political actions. And I think if one looks at Trump's America, relying on ignorance of the scriptures and selectively choosing parts of the scriptures to justify what they're doing. What worries me is that perhaps the Indians are doing the same thing. If one looks at the Rig Veda, it talks about people from the north, the Indo-Europeans conquering the darker-skinned Dravidians. And you talked about the adherence to the scriptures that the Hindu observe. Isn't there a contradiction there?
There are many contradictions. I mean, where do you start? The thing is that Hinduism itself is full of contradictions and has lived with those contradictions. And I think the genius of Hindutva is that it's taken on some of those. It's sort of internalized some of them. So it allows some of them to grow and develop and become key mobilizing movements, like the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. I mean, there's a court case due soon which may or may not settle that issue. I mean, the parties have said that they'll abide by it. But the Ramanujan case that was mentioned earlier, I mean, there are numerous versions of the Ramayana, and in fact there have been exhibitions attacked which showed these different versions. Some of them had been written by early RSS writers. So there are parts of India where, or Sri Lanka, where Ram and Sita are seen as brother and sister. Now, I mean, the dominant version that we all grew up with, obviously Sita was Ram's wife and his faithful and devoted wife, throughout her life.
There's only one authentic version, Valmiki Ramayana.
But that's the point, you see, that you're saying there's one authentic version, but there are many versions of this story, and different groups in India have lived and worshipped according to different versions of the story. And for me, I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I have most of my relatives are. Some of my relatives are very religious, some not. But the act of being Hindu was to be able to live with whichever stories you want and to worship how you want. And in fact, we don't see ourselves in that way of monotheistic religions, that you have one central text and one central place that's the Holy Land and one central way of worshipping. I would say that that's not very Hindu, because it is so diverse in its practice.
Okay, we've got time for about two more questions. I'll take the woman on the back row there, and then the gentleman in the green shirt there.
Hi, I just wanted to ask your opinion, Gita. Do you think that, in this case, Hindu fundamentalism was the primary factor behind the anti-Sikh riots of 1984?
No. In a word, it was organized by the Congress. Indira Gandhi had been murdered by her Sikh bodyguards, and Congress leaders and activists, in very similar ways to what later happened in Gujarat, they got hold of petrol, they got hold of rations and so on, and they in a very systematic way went out to largely poor Sikh neighborhoods and massacred people and raped them and burnt them. And so there are some allegations that the RSS may have been involved as well, but actually the primary responsibility has to be with the Congress Party, and it was a horrific set of massacres for which there still is no justice and accountability. On that, I think, I mean, this was raised by this gentleman, and other people have said, why are you talking about 2002, what about 1984? on that particular issue, the civil liberties community has very clean hands in the sense that, one, they mobilized, I mean, a lot of my friends mobilized, worked in the refugee camps and so on. They also organized investigations. They named the guilty parties. They named MPs and other Congress leaders who were involved and had been, witnesses had seen them and so on. So there's a mountain of evidence around this. And it really was, I mean, every party is capable of committing atrocities and doing it for political gain. And that's what happened.
So, two questions. Firstly, how strong is the BJP in southern India, given the conversation that we've had about belief in India areas? And secondly, has there been any attempt to attack the teaching of evolution in schools?
That's a good one, because there have been a lot of changes to the textbooks. I mean, Hitler has been hugely popularized, which is why it's quite remarkable that the links with the Jewish right in Israel are very, very strong, because this is a party that openly supports Nazism. I think that the issue of, the key issue for the BJP is not so much creation theory in the Christian sense. Its creation theory is about the Aryans, which is why I talked about that. And I think there is an attempt to teach that. In the South, you're right, it has been largely a northern party, but it's spreading to other areas through alliances. So there are key southern parties which had their origins in anti-Brahmanical movements, and in fact are quite atheist and anti-northern and anti-many things, but some of them have been in alliance with the BJP. But they also have made alliances in some of the eastern states, which are now Christian majority states, where wouldn't have thought that they would have made much headway, but they have, I think, become very much more a national party than they were before.
Thank you. Right, drinks await. But before we wrap up, I've just got a few announcements to make about some upcoming events of the NSS. Tomorrow, the NSS Roadshow rolls on to Leicester. There'll be a historical talk at Leicester Secular Hall from Bob Forder on Chapman Cohn, who is the longest serving president of the NSS. That talk will be repeated in London on the 13th of September. On the 27th of October, we'll be in Birmingham for a conference on healthcare and secularism. So that will look at some of the issues around the intersection of secularism and healthcare, some very kind of important issues around infant circumcision, conversion therapy, and conscience exemptions. So please do join us in Birmingham for that one if you can. On the 18th of May next year, and this hasn't been released yet, tickets aren't on sale, but they will go on sale next week. But I can announce exclusively today that we'll be having a major international conference in London on religious freedom and its limits, really exploring the concept of religious freedom. We've got a really good lineup of speakers for that, so please do join us. Get your tickets early to avoid disappointment for that conference. That's in May next year. Right, just leaves me to thank Gita again for a very stimulating and informative lecture. Thank you very much. Please do, if you want to speak to myself or any of the campaign team that are here today, or some of our directors, please do join us for drinks outside, where we're happy to take questions. Just please show your appreciation for Gita Sahgal.